Today, I'm sharing 10 insanely effective techniques to memorize vocabulary in a new language. If you're new here, bonjour les amis. My name is Matthew. I used to work for Fluent Forever and was mentored by the American polyglot and best-selling author Gabriel Weiner. Since branching out on my own, I've realized that I just love learning languages. So I've developed my own techniques and tools, and I'd love to share them with you. Before I start with the 10 techniques, I just want to talk about why it's important to memorize vocabulary in a foreign language. There are actually studies that show that the amount of vocabulary that you know in a new language is correlated to the amount of fluency or proficiency that you have in that language. So for example, a learner knows about 2,000 words in French, let's say, then they're more likely to be at around the A2 upper beginner level. On the other hand, if that French learner actually knows about 5,000 French words, then they're more likely to be at the B2 or even C1 level of French. And that's just logical, it makes sense. If you think about it in English or your native language, you'll recognize that younger kids tend to have smaller vocabularies and they're often less fluent than adults, who of course have much larger vocabularies, who are much more educated, and therefore they're more fluent and more able to talk about a wide range of subjects. And that's the same thing for learning a new language. Your goal should be to try and increase the amount of vocabulary that you know. Of course, knowing the vocabulary isn't a guarantee of speaking absolutely fluently, because you may know lots of words, but you can't string those sentences together. But there is still that correlation that when a learner knows more words, they are more likely to be more proficient and fluent. In my other videos about speaking fluently, I go through some detail about how then you can transform those words you've learned into fluent speech. But for now, let's move on to the 10 insanely effective techniques to memorize vocab in a new language. 1. Input and immersive learning. One of the most effective ways to memorize vocabulary is through immersive input. What this means is that you should surround yourself with as much of the language as possible. When you listen to music, you watch movies, and you read books in your target language, then you're exposed more to the richness of the vocabulary in that language. This makes it much easier to remember words and phrases because you've just seen them so many times. This idea that getting all of this input is a great way to acquire a new language and to acquire new words without so much effort. 2. Focus on high frequency words. Now for this technique, you should prioritize words that are the most common in a language. Getting lots of input is really great in a language, but sometimes it can be difficult to get started because it's like the chicken and the egg dilemma. You don't know enough words to understand what's being said in a book or what is being sung in a song. And so when you learn high frequency words, this can be a supplement to help with getting started with input. High frequency words are the words that appear most frequently in books, movies, in texts, and in conversations. When you try and memorize vocab in a new language, it makes sense to master these high frequency words first because it gives you a solid foundation in communication. 3. Personalization. If you come across a new word in a foreign language and you keep forgetting what it is, then personalization can be a great way to memorize that vocab. Personalize your learning experience by connecting those new words to your own life. You can create sentences or stories that are related to your interests, your hobbies, and your daily activities. So when you come across a new word, let's say in French, like école, then you can potentially use that word, école, which means school, and you can write out a sentence or write out a short story about how you went to school and you had a bad day there, or you can talk about where you went to school or how your kids go to school. Doing all of that helps you remember this kind of word because you've put it in a personal context and it's more meaningful for you. This personal touch makes retention much easier, and of course, it's much more enjoyable talking about yourself. 4. Spaced repetition and flashcards. Now, if the first 3 methods weren't working well for you, this method surely will do wonders. So spaced repetition is this idea of repeating certain words over increasing spaces of time. If you know a word really well, then you'll review it in greater and greater spaces of time because you don't need to review it as frequently. But if you're really having trouble with a certain word in a new language, then spaced repetition means that you will review it in shorter spaces until you do remember it. When you do start remembering it, then those spaces get longer and longer as well. So you don't need to review it as much. This can drastically boost your memory for vocabulary, and there are actually flashcard tools that have spaced repetition algorithms built in them, such as Anki, which I highly recommend because I use it myself on a daily basis to learn all the languages I'm learning. With these spaced repetition apps like Anki, you create flashcards that contain the words, the phrases, the sentences that you want to memorize, and then you review these cards on a regular basis. The easy words you'll see less and less because they're easy, but the harder ones you'll see more frequently because you need that extra review. And these spaced repetition apps like Anki do all of that automatically for you, so it can be really convenient. 5. Use sentences and context. Sometimes when you learn words in a foreign language on their own, it can be a bit difficult to memorize them, especially if they're a really long word or a word that you won't really encounter on a regular basis. For example, in Spanish, you might come across the word empalagar, which can mean to disgust you with something. Now, on its own, empalagar, you might forget it because empalagar it has no real connection to the word disgust when you think of the letters and the sounds. It sounds different. But if you try and memorize this word in a sentence, such as Oye, esas películas me empalagan, which means, oh, these movies just disgust me. Well, now you've got that word in a sentence, and you'll probably think of movies that disgust you, and hence you're more likely to remember the word empalagar because now it's in a sentence, it's got some personal meaning, and it's got a context of what actually disgusts you. So you learn many things when you learn words in a sentence. So the tip here really is if you're having trouble memorizing a certain word, try to learn that word in the context of complete sentences in the target language. This helps you learn how words are used naturally, and this reinforces grammar rules and sentence structures. 6. Use pictures to memorize words. Now, there's a lot of research actually that shows that you can get a visual memory boost if you use pictures when you're trying to memorize new words. As you probably already know, many of us humans are visual creatures. We really use our eyes to experience the world around us. So it helps to associate words with images, which will help to enhance your visual memory. One way to do this is to use picture flashcards to learn new words. For every new word that you're learning in a new language, try and find a relevant image that represents that word. If you're learning the word ma or horse in Mandarin Chinese, then have a card with a picture of a horse on one side and the character ma on the other side of the flashcard. 7. Audios and IPA. Now, don't just use your eyes to help with your memory of new foreign words, also use your ears. You can listen to audio recordings of native speakers saying the new foreign words that you want to learn. This will help with your pronunciation of those new words, but it'll also help you memorize those words better because you'll have another way to engage your senses to have an experience of that word. You can also use the IPA or International Phonetic Alphabet. The IPA or International Phonetic Alphabet are sound symbols, and they're another way that can help you associate the word in a different way. The IPA are like those weird little symbols that you see sometimes in dictionaries, and they help you to pronounce in a standard way that new word. So you could make digital flashcards that actually have these audios already built in to the flashcard. On one side of the flashcard, you could have the audio of the new word, and the other side, the written text of the word. 8. Grammar info for words. Another way that you could memorize new vocab easily is to link it to its network of grammar information associated to it. If you want to memorize the word kakain, kakain means going to eat in the future in Filipino Tagalog. If you want to learn kakain, it also helps to link it to other tenses of that word, such as kumain, which is the past and infinitive tense, as well as kumakain, the present tense. Now you could have all of this grammar information in a table, which you could put on a flashcard as well, or in a notebook. And so when you're learning kakain, you're actually linking it to all these other pools of words related to it. And that's a really effective way to not only learn one word, but all the variations of that word too. 9. Writing words to memorize them. You could also do writing practice exercises to help retain new vocabulary. You know, writing out words is often like a very therapeutic activity, and some people actually love writing out whole lists of words because getting that physical motion with their hand is a great kinesthetic and physical way to experience that new word. For me personally, it can be a bit painful and a bit boring at times to just keep writing the words, but I know that for some learners, they just love doing it. For me, I prefer digital flashcards because a lot of the system is automated. But if you do love writing as a way to memorize new words, you could consider keeping a language learning journal or diary to write out your progress and also to write out the words. I'm familiar also with the gold list method of writing out words to improve vocabulary, so you could check that out as well if that works for you. 10. Speaking words to memorize them. Finally, you could actually memorize new words by actually speaking them. I know, what a concept. I know it sounds simple, but hear me out just for a bit. If you're more intentional with learning new words, you could integrate them into the speeches or dialogues and conversations that you have. Recently, I came across this new Spanish phrase that I hadn't heard before. I saw it in a movie and I wanted to memorize it. And I thought, how could I use this word, which is buen rollo, which is like a good vibe. And I thought, hey, so I thought of a situation where I might use this word in spoken Spanish. And I thought maybe if I was in a restaurant and it had a really good atmosphere and it was so chill and relaxed and I was having a good time, then I could say to my Spanish speaking friend, oye, en este lugar hay buena música y un buen rollo, ¿no? So yeah, you could practice and memorize words by actually incorporating those new words into dialogues and speeches that you will actually have, and you're more likely to really remember it since you've used it and applied it. Another speaking technique is to try and find all the new words that you've recently encountered, like 5 of them, and then try and make a story or speech out of those 5 words. Well, that's it. These were the 10 insanely effective techniques for memorizing new vocabulary in a foreign language. And if you really liked this video, I strongly suggest you check out this other video I made about my review of the book that totally changed my language learning journey, because memorizing new vocab was a really key part in that book.